and welcome to Notes from the Oracle. I'm Connor, and together with Jack, my co-host from Cabin 6, we're going beyond Half-Blood Hill to take a closer look at the electrifying mythology of Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Book 1, The Lightning Thief. Chapter 3, Grover unexpectedly loses his pants. Unfortunately, a rather misleading title, if you ask me, since he won't lose his pants, he simply appears without them.
Connor, before we jump into specifics and go through things piece by piece, I just want to say, as a whole, I think this is my favorite chapter thus far. There's probably the least amount of intrigue, like per page, but the writing style of Rick really, really shines. I feel like Percy is really coming into his own as a character. His sarcasm, biting wit, and just overall aggression has just really kind of illuminated how it's reminding me of why I liked Percy so much. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on kind of the whole of this chapter. Do you agree? Do you think that the character of Percy is coming into his own more in this chapter than the prior ones?
I fully agree. I think that this chapter is electric. I love getting introduced to Sally. I don't think she's like a super important character to this book in particular. She's unfortunately a bit more of a plot device, but the way that she's described and interacts with Percy is just so perfect. I think that Gabe is a great initial antagonist as we start diving kind of deeper into the plot. I fully agree. This is so much fun. We start to get a lot more Percy lore as well, instead of just kind of general world setup, I think. This is where the exposition starts to transform from just giving us, here's the setup. Now here's the setup for the plot. And that is exciting. I think that's really, really fun. And in all honesty, as far as like the myth stuff, all of that, it's a very light chapter in terms of deep lore, as you were saying. But I think it really gives the characters room to breathe. And I think you're right in that this is where Percy really starts to feel like the Percy that you know if you've read these books before, if you've gone back time and time again. This is where you're like, that's a breath of fresh air. I love hearing him just tell some guy he's going to kick him in the nuts. You know? It feels great.
He's such a sassy little guy. And I guess I forgot. You know, I always knew that he had that kind of like New Yorker spice to him, that edge, that visual of Percy being just outright, I would say, antagonistic towards people that he doesn't like. Just somehow slipped my mind over the years and makes him, I would say, a lot more compelling, but most importantly, super fun to read about.
Yeah. Honestly, in a weird way, almost a Holden Caulfield vibe to it.
I do agree. There is still this psycho edge, Percy. Yeah. It literally starts out, line 1, confession time. I ditched Grover as soon as we got to the bus terminal.
I just wrote bad friend.
Yes! What a horrible friend. Especially when only in the few lines after, we see that Grover, a little bit unnerving maybe, but was genuinely freaking out over Percy's well-being. And Percy's response to that was, I'm just going to totally remove myself from this person. Keep in mind, Grover he's on the up and up. All right. We know that he's a good guy, not only through his prior actions, but he has business cards. I struggle with finding Percy to be, again, as I have in these prior few chapters, a good person. In fact, I would go so far as to say he is a moderately not good person. He has these internal monologues about how he feels bad about stuff, but he just acts in such a way that is totally counter to what a well-adjusted child or person would do. Now, that being said, I do love Percy's soft spot for his mom.
Yes.
And Connor, let me tell you, I always knew that I enjoyed Sally Jackson. I remember enjoying her character. I did not remember how sad and tragic Sally Jackson is. I totally did not recall that apparently her parents died in a plane crash when she was 5, and she was raised by an absentee uncle, and that she wanted to have career aspirations to be a novelist and worked all throughout school so she could save up enough money for college. And then her uncle got cancer. She put that aside and quit school. So she didn't graduate high school to take care of him. And then he died. So she was left with, and I quote, no money, no family, and no diploma. I don't know if I just totally glossed over that when I read these as a child, but this was effectively new information for me. Did you remember this?
Jack, I even forgot about that. And I could completely forgotten that she had this just brutal upbringing. And you're so right. I feel like you and I both have a similar figure in our life to Sally, who's someone that we can depend on and care about. And this chapter does a really amazing job of very quickly endearing you to this person. I mean, at one point, I wrote in my note that she is literally described as a paragon. It's a bit of a ways in, but just the phrase that she has never raised her voice at Percy or said an unkind word to anyone. Rick is going to eventually take her from us, and that's going to be a driving motivation, and he wants you to feel that. This chapter makes you feel that. This is the setup for that. It is such a wonderful way to explore her character. In case you didn't know, Jack, just to make you feel a little bit worse, those parents who died in a plane crash, their names were Jim and Estelle, according to the wiki. And the uncle, his name was Rich, and he's further characterized as a bit more aloof and into his studies and his own whimsy than having been truly absentee. However, in this book in particular, he is. He's described as someone who's just not there, and she nonetheless does the right thing over and over again. And it does remind me of like every appearance that I think we have of Sally from here on out in any book. She is this paragon of hope and goodness. And I think that's really important because, especially with Percy being this kind of more negative character right now, right? He's in 6th grade. This is a time
Mm-hmm.
where you kind of expect kids to be mean. I feel like no one sums it up better than I think it's a John Mulaney bit where he says they will pick out the thing that you hate most about yourself and make fun of you for that. So
Yes.
it's nice to have that balance of 12-year-old angsty tween to his genuinely kind mother. And I love that he is nothing but kind to her in return. Now, does he tell her the absolute truth throughout this chapter? No. But even then, it's because he doesn't want to stress her out. And I can at
Mm-hmm.
least respect that a little bit. He really cares about her, and I think that really shows. And it's really great. It's really sweet. It's cute.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And the thing that gets me with Sally, and you had mentioned that later on she's referred to as a paragon,
Oh no, I called her a paragon.
or
Sorry.
you call
I
her a paragon.
I say that the description pretty much makes her out as a paragon.
Gotcha. I, for a bit here, was thinking like, oh, she doesn't raise her voice, she doesn't get into a fight. And I was like, maybe she's a bit of a doormat. But then near the kind of middle end of the chapter, it starts talking about her little ways of rebellion. Like she has her rebellious streak, which, maybe Percy gets that from her with the spiteful, she got into an argument with Gabe about how there's no blue foods, and so she has gone out of her way ever since then to eat and bring home as many blue foods as possible. That's iconic. I love that. That's the kind of spite that I can get behind. And I feel like that little detail, at least when I was reading this as like, an 11-year-old, I just thought it was like, haha, that's funny. But what a good deep dive into her character, from going from this kind of rad housewife who she wouldn't dare speak up to like the man of the house. No, it's very clear she is doing this for reasons that are unbeknownst to us right now at this point in the book. But she is very clearly spunky and has some hot streaks. And that is just so nice to see. It makes her such a compelling and rounded character even within this first, like 10 pages that we are introduced to her.
Absolutely. Well, and you mentioned the blue food, and I know everyone in like the Percy Jackson sphere loves that. If you did a watch party for season 1 of the new TV show, you probably did it with some sort of blue food on hand, and this is why. But it really does also make a difference to know that like that's her way of communicating to Percy as well. Hey, I see you. I recognize what you're going through. And that little act of rebellion is a way for her to consistently, without ever having to actually say something, give him an avenue to show that she sees what he sees and is on his side, right? She's trying to be supportive
Hmm.
in a way that is creating as little conflict as possible. And that's impressive because she's not in a great situation and she is doing it all for Percy. Just
Hmm.
going through and reading some of the things where, talking about how she worked odd jobs and got her high school diploma. All of this is just it's so impressive and it makes it very obvious as well how she could attract the attention of a god.
Oh yeah, no, it totally makes sense. And one thing that stuck out to me, shifting slightly, and maybe this is me getting a little nitpicky, but I'm curious if this stuck out to you. It's made very apparent that throughout her entire life, Sally has not had a lot of money or really opportunities. The opportunities that she tried to make for herself basically all got taken from her by the cruelty of just life. Now, and maybe this is explained later. Why does she stay in New York City, specifically Manhattan, which has one of the highest costs of living in the entire United States? More importantly, why is she staying in what is it, Upper East Side Manhattan, which is also one of the most expensive parts of New York City? Like the scent is masked better that way? Or it, was it just because Manhattan, New York sounds better than somebody living in, I don't know, the Bronx? Like, why is that?
So I'm putting on my theory hat. We're into
Okay,
speculation territory.
we are into speculation. That's my favorite territory, Connor.
Now, we know that the reason that she is with Gabe is specifically because he smells. And I think
He's
you
stinky.
could argue that part of the reason that they live in Manhattan is because it too can be a little stinky. It's crowded. That probably contributes to like safety in numbers, although she does specifically ship Percy away.
Hmm.
If I had to guess, Manhattan, they're close to the ocean there, rather than moving somewhere like upstate, further inland. Staying to the ocean might be one of the safest places for her because she thinks that in a worst case scenario, Poseidon can come help. Again, that's speculation. I also think it's worth pointing out that this isn't her home, this is Gabe's home. And
Hmm.
he views it as his home. So it might just be that Gabe, the man who gambles all of his money away, is the person making these poor financial decisions
Right.
because he sees himself again as the man of the house and she just happens to want to live near the ocean. This is where he works. He's got the electronic mega mart in Queens. And so this is just where he wants to live. But that's
Okay.
speculation.
That's all incredibly fair. So I guess it isn't explicitly stated whether Sally is from New York City. That is just an extrapolation that I made.
I don't think you're wrong to extrapolate that, given that she has been vacationing at this same cabin on the beach in Montauk that they head to in this
Hmm.
chapter for obviously since before Percy was born, because that's where she met Poseidon. And so I would imagine that you're not incorrect in at least assuming that she is from the state, if not
Hmm.
from the city.
Now, that cabin, do they own that or no?
It's not
I,
mentioned. I don't think so.
okay, it's just a cabin. I think they made some mention to it being a rental cabin, but I don't know if that means that they rent it out or that is just like Airbnb before Airbnb, that they are like, this is the place we go when we vacation. And we don't own it, but we go there for a weekend and we dish out some money for it and it's ours.
I'm gonna guess that they don't own it. I'm gonna guess they
Okay.
don't own it. Okay, we're gonna jump ahead a little bit here and we can come back and talk about some of the other things, but I did have something I wanted to float by you regarding this cabin in particular.
Yeah.
So it says when she first says 3 nights, same cabin. Before she even says where they're going, she just says, "We're going to the beach." And Percy immediately knows it's Montauk. So they
Right.
must go back there pretty regularly. It says that Percy and Sally had not been back there in the last 2 summers because Gabe said there wasn't enough money, which implies that they try to go there at least somewhat annually because the fact that they missed 2 summers is notable. So maybe they used to go like biannually. I don't know how much you remember about Jason Grace and Thalia Grace and their mother's backstory, but this is interesting because it's really, to me, showing that she spent her life, Percy is 12. She spent 12 years constantly going back to the exact same place to vacation, returning to the place where she met a god. It's interesting, I think, to me, because we'll see a couple of instances over the course of the novels of partners of parents of demigods, but the human parents, the mortal parents, becoming infatuated and obsessed
Obsessed.
with the godly parent. I mean, think Luke's mother, who thinks that she deserves to be the new Oracle because she can see through the mist. You've got Jason's mother, who only has Jason because she's so obsessed with Zeus after the first kid, and she thinks that a second kid will keep Zeus around and make him stay. And so, in a weird way, it's just really interesting to see Sally, who in so many ways is this paragon character, even she succumbs to this obsession over Poseidon. And maybe that is also in part why they live so close to the ocean. She
Hmm.
constantly feels the need to be near Poseidon and a part of his life, even if to him she is mostly insignificant, unfortunately. And
Right.
for what it's worth, I do think it's worth pointing out that if we are comparing her to Luke's mom and Jason and Thalia's mom, she's doing way better. She's doing way,
Oh
way
yeah.
better. But it's definitely interesting to me to draw that line.
No, that's a very good point. And I appreciate that you mentioned the infatuation and obsession because one note that I have is just how good was the dick? Because I picked up on that immediately as well. And I didn't even think to consider it or to compare it to the other mortal parents that we see throughout the series, mainly because I forgot about them. But those are all very good points, Connor. My point still stands. She could live by the ocean. Hell, she could live closer to Montauk and still live in a place that's cheaper, that might be safer. I don't know. I can't help but feel like it would be really dangerous for one of these children of the big three to live very close to the Empire State Building, in which there is Mount Olympus, where, the gods are. And I would think there is a high concentration of godly and monstrous activity.
I don't think
Maybe
Sally
I'm
knows that
wrong.
though. Like
She
genuinely.
doesn't know about that?
I don't think she knows about the Empire State Building. I think that's why she always goes back to Montauk. She knows that Poseidon appears one place. Because I
That's
don't think
fair.
it's until Percy goes there himself and then
Hmm.
comes back and is like, I've got to go to the Empire State Building. And she's like, why? And he's like, that's where Olympus is. I could be remembering
Gotcha.
wrong. And I'm sure we'll be able to keep an eye out for it now as we get deeper into the novel. But that's my best guess. Is I don't think Sally actually even knows that the Empire State Building is where Olympus is.
Interesting. That's a fair point. I didn't consider that. I just assumed that she knew because, if she would, maybe it would come up in pillow talk. I don't know. They were having a good time that one summer that they were together.
Yeah, you would think. But then again, if you think about Poseidon has learned from other instances, and if you imagine this has happened through millennia, there have got to be other people like Mrs. Grace who have just truly lost their minds over this.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't want to tell that lady your home address.
It's true. It's like they're a little too attached. It's like baby reindeer. They're stalkers. You're like, all right,
Yeah.
you go over there. You're crazy. You're a good
I
lay,
mean,
but you just got to chill
especially
over there.
especially when you consider that the gods look at these people and consider them rather grossly, but effectively no different than like a pet,
A
right?
pet. Yeah, they're an Omni Man. They are.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah, she's more like a pet to me. It's
Exactly.
it's
And so
really
you wouldn't.
gross looking at it
Yeah.
from that perspective, and something that, again, reading this as a late elementary school, early middle schooler, definitely never picked up on it at
Oh,
all.
absolutely not.
I just was like, oh, she just loved him so much, and Poseidon really loved her, but just couldn't go and be with her. Honestly, even if there weren't those rules about the big three not having kids, I guess I'll propose this more as a question. If that rule was not in place, do you think Poseidon would be with Sally?
I think that's a tough question because Poseidon in particular does mention that he really loves Sally, but he just can't do it. So I think the answer is no. And then if you go look at like the other gods, sorry, the answer is definitely no. Granted, some of the other gods, like your Hermes of the world,
Hmm.
do tend to get around more. And so I think that's a bad comparison as someone like Hermes. But even the other gods who only have like one or two children, they're not present.
Hmm.
They're just not. And so I would imagine that you're right in that it probably wouldn't change without the rule which surrounds, the great prophecy and everything. Again, I don't think that they would view a human as equal enough, which is
Hmm.
really kind of
It's
gross to
dark.
say. Yeah.
That's dark. That's a dark concept for a children's book series.
Yeah. And I mean, for the most part, I think that they just kind of gloss over it, but it's all there, right? Like I feel like
Yes.
it's one of those things there is authorial intent in that, but also it is middle grade fiction.
Hmm. So
But
we've talked about how Sally's life was very difficult. Now, Smelly Gabe, he's living large, baby. He's got his own apartment. He's chilling in the living room. He's playing poker with his best buds. ESPN is blaring in the background. He's got Stephen A. Smith screaming about basketball. He's got chips. He's day drinking.
he smells like
He's
moldy
been
garlic
drinking.
pizza, which means
He
he's
smells
eating
like moldy
pizza.
garlic pizza. He's got a cigar. He's got his stogie. He's just puffing on that thing in the middle of the living room. And the first thing he says is, "You're home. Your mom's working. You got any cash?" Which is, Connor, the second time in this book series in which an adult seems to imply, or Percy is told, like, "Do you got cash? Do you have money?" Or it's, at the very
Yeah,
least, is like, Percy is under the impression, like, "Oh, this adult thinks I have money, or this adult knows I have money," which then we see he actually does. He's actually got a decent amount of money for like a 12-year-old. He's got money left over from taking a cab that he wasn't even planning on taking. He took that to get rid of Grover.
I forgot that he took the cab just to get rid of Grover.
Yeah.
He could have just had a
So
whole
he's
20 in his
actually
pocket.
he's pretty liquid. And this is 20 in like what, 2005? That's a decent chunk of change. Like that's solid.
Now, I will say, Jack, we do have an answer as to where he gets this money from. I think it's in that first chapter. Percy thinks that one of the things that they might be mad at him for is for selling candy out of his locker. Now, knowing that his mom works for a candy store, she probably sends him care packages. And then, if I had to guess, he pilfers out all the blue candy and sells the rest.
Speaking of good business sense, Gabe, living large, as previously mentioned, also kick ass job because he is a manager at an electronics megamart in Queens. But he's doing remote work before that was even really a thing. He just
He's
doesn't
doing
show
remote
up.
work well before remote work. This book, reminder, was first published in 2005.
Yeah.
2005, and Gabe is so ahead of the curve on the remote work trend.
And the best part is, he doesn't have to do anything. He just gets to sit at home.
Oh.
So this is all to say, I'm a Gabe fan. Uh,
I did not expect that to be where this was going.
I think he's got it made. I think he has set himself up for success. And I really hope that things end up just like rock solid for him, you know?
Oh, you think so?
I think so.
I do find it funny, and I don't know if this is deliberate or not, but that Gabe's last name is Ugliano, literally has ugly in the first four letters almost.
I, as a child, 100% pronounced it in my head as Ugliano,
I think you're supposed to. Again, knowing the target audience, I think you're supposed to do that, and then someone's supposed to go, actually, it's Ugliano, and you go, is it though?
which, come to think of it, Connor, that might have been you when we were at daycare
It
and we were
probably
talking,
was me.
and you hit me with the actually. As part of the
I
talented and gifted program, I actually know that this is a long U, emphasis on the oo in Ugliano, and it probably built up a lot of spite in me.
That is undoubtedly exactly the type of thing that I would have done. And I apologize in retrospect.
Hey man, you've grown as a person, and that's all I
I
can
have.
ask.
And I got you to read more books, so was
You
it that
did get
bad?
me to read. You specifically got me to read far beyond my grade level because I wanted you to shut up about all the stuff you were reading.
And look at me now, a 26-year-old reading middle grade fiction, and I
Reading
love it
Percy
every
Jackson.
second.
Let's go.
No, I think it's great. And actually, I think that there is a lot of interesting things here. I do love how much they emphasize the smell of Gabe, because that is
Mhm.
obviously what we'll learn is very important. I do like that we also get one of the first instances of Percy's sassy little putting words in people's mouth in italics. The no, welcome back, good to see you. How was your life in the last 6 months? It's just so fun when Percy again is just purely sarcastic. He has no patience for this sort of nonsense, and I love it.
Mhm.
I did take a couple of notes here on just the interest as to why Sally never talks about Poseidon. Obviously, we know why, but it is funny to find out that if you go look at the actual timeline of events, Sally is so careful to hide any evidence of her relationship with Poseidon or any evidence of Percy because Zeus would be so furious that the pact is broken. And in reality, Thalia is born before Percy and Jason is born after Percy. So across the timeline, Zeus, who is the most rigorous of the enforcers, clearly is just breaking this rule all the time and only thinks that he is above the rule, which is very Zeus of him.
Yeah, what a dick. I, that's effectively what I've got down. What really brought the whole Zeus thing to my attention, at least, was, and I have no idea if this is related, probably not, but Sally's parents dying in a plane crash. And it just got me thinking about how good of an antagonist Zeus is throughout this series because he's part of the quote unquote good guys, right? The gods are the good guys in comparison to the Titans, but he sucks both
Yeah.
in this story and in the actual mythology. He is a horrible father. He is an outright maniac and just a bully. He's just such a dickhead. And he's one of those characters that at least I remember really loving to hate. Whenever he was on the page, there was always this tension and almost like a hold your breath moment of, is Percy going to make it out of this? We know that Zeus is a bit unhinged, quick to anger, and can atomize Percy in an instant if he wants, or turn him into a fucking animal or shoot him into a constellation or whatever, any number of heinous godly things that he wants to do to torture this child. And so this is a bit of, looking ahead. But as we're again rediscovering these characters, I'm really excited as an adult to see if there is still that air of kind of grandeur and menace that Zeus had when I was a kid. A bit of an
Yeah.
aside, but something that I wanted to throw out there.
No, actually, I think you raise a good point because and I'd made the plane crash connection, and I wasn't even sure if it was worth mentioning because it does feel so unrelated. But at the resolution of the novel, Percy's found the lightning bolt, he's defeated Ares, and he's headed to return it to Zeus, and he has to fly there. And that is a huge deal because they're like, Zeus could just shoot you out of the air at any moment. So I think it really does imply that when planes crash and go down like that, it is an act of Zeus. So whether or not he did it on purpose, it does paint that like that is the carelessness of the gods. Sally's parents dying, Sally's orphan status is I think you're right. I think it's a result of Zeus, and I think it does do a good job because I think so much of the theme of the first series in particular is that yeah, sure the Titans are the bad guys, but the gods aren't the good guys just because our heroes and our protagonists are on the side of them. The gods are an ephemeral force beyond anything that we as humans and mortals are supposed to be able to comprehend. And that leaves them super aloof and dangerous. I think you're very right. I think it's going to be one of the more interesting things I agree to kind of go back and pay attention to. Especially when you pay attention to the reason that the pact between the big three is made at all in the first place is because World War II was literally caused by the powerful demigod children of Poseidon and Zeus versus Hades. Literally a war of the gods' carelessness bleeding into mortal lives. They just don't care. They create unfathomable conflicts.
Which, and I mean this and it will not sound this way, but I mean this with the best of intentions narratively in digging into this world. Talking about plane crashing, right? And
Hmm.
we're in New York. 9/11, Connor. What's up with that? Was that an act beyond the gods? Or is that something? Because if the Nazis are part of this, I can't help but think a plane crashing into the World Trade Center, that can't be off limits, right? We're talking
I
about bringing the Holocaust into the Percy Jackson mythos. That's all I'm saying. What's up with 9/11 then? Was that it? Was
all
that
right.
an act of the gods?
I'm putting my speculation hat back on,
It's
Jack.
back on. You may as well
It's
keep
back
it
on.
on because that's where I
I will
reside.
keep it on from here on out. However, you raise a good question, and I think I have an answer as to how Rick Riordan can get himself out of this one. And that is that he also describes Mount Olympus as moving with the powers of the world. And at that point during World War II, the quote unquote powers of the world, you could argue, are in the Percy Jackson lore largely Europe and America. Whether or not that's accurate historically is not a debate that I want to get into. But I think by that same logic, knowing that in 2001 the Empire State Building was already Mount Olympus, you could argue that that's probably not the purview of the gods or caused by the gods because they've focused their efforts a lot more on the Western world and America.
So you're saying that 9/11 was not an act of the gods because their
I'm
sphere
gonna
of influence was largely American and Western, and
correct.
the
I am
attack
going
on
to
the World Trade
argue
Center that one cold September morning was not an attack on the West, unless it was Bush. But we're not here to talk about that.
yeah, I was gonna say now we're starting to get into some speculation that
It's the
perhaps is.
speculation hats. It's on a little too tight.
I was just say that might be outside of my speculation hat's purview. I can only fit
That's
so
the
much in there.
conspiracy helmet. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah. I guess it's
we'll leave
conspiracy
that on the
helmet.
shelf.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We
That's
don't.
good. Staying over there. We don't touch that until much later.
We could start putting that on in like book 4.
So, something that I do want to touch on slightly as we're, getting through and getting to meet Gabe and just how reprehensible and awesome he is. Something that, and I said I was going to bring this movie up many times, the Percy Jackson movie actually does really well, and I might say does better than the series.
I if you're about to say what I think you're about to say, I fully agree.
Gabe in the movie, played by Joe, I think it's Pantoliano. Phenomenal. Phenomenal as Gabe. And Gabe in the series, is good. I actually found him kind of like unironically likable in the series and felt kind of bad about what happened to him at the end. It didn't feel super deserved.
Yeah, in the
In the
series, he's just
movie,
kind of a doofus,
yeah, he's just
right?
kind of a dweeb. He's just kind of a weird dweeb loser. Gabe in the
Hmm.
movie is a horrid wretch. He is a belch of humanity taken form. And this is no offense to the actor, but he looks smelly. Like you can just he looks like he reeks of like cottage cheese and like cheap cologne. I've got to throw my flowers to the movie with Pierce Brosnan as Chiron and with Joe Pantoliano as Gabe Ugliano. They are who I imagine. They have taken the place of my mental image and are who I am imagining in these stories.
I think that's entirely valid. I do find it really interesting. One of the first things that Gabe is doing is he's asking for money from Percy, which, like, Eddie almost stands up for him. So it's like, come on, Eddie. You're so close. You can do better. But what I'm getting at is your report card came, Brain Boy. How do you feel about Gabe calling Percy Brain Boy? Because to me, that's really close to Seaweed Brain. And I think it's really interesting
Mm.
to eventually see the contrast between the way Annabeth is using something about Percy. She's showing she knows him. What eventually becomes a true term of endearment across their relationship in the later books. And just to compare it to the way that, Gabe is shouting at Percy, Brain Boy, and
Yeah, it's
trying to make him
demeaning.
out as a moron. It's demeaning, it's rude. I just think it's a really interesting contrast. Maybe that's all it is, but I just kind of wanted to see what you thought.
That is incredibly interesting. I did not consider that parallel. I think that unfortunately, Gabe and Annabeth might be similar in the fact that they're both assholes. I think that might be where it starts and stops. I think that it started off as a genuine insult on behalf of Annabeth that eventually turned into a term of endearment. So I think that in terms of order of operations, probably both are meant to be insults at the start. One
Well,
happens to stay an insult, and the other one turns into kind of a pet name.
let's see. We get more obviously description about Sally as she arrives home. Oh, a very obvious comparison is that she's described as smelling like the best things in the world because she works at a candy shop, which I think is obviously just meant to be a stark contrast to Gabe, who we have gotten a very visceral description of his smell, which is, again, so unpleasant. And so it's nice to be like, all right, well, at least someone here doesn't smell like vile filth.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. I think them being foils, not only, that juxtaposition really helps amplify the traits of both Sally and Gabe. It also, again, makes you think, if you have not read these before, like, why is this wonderful saint of a woman with this piece of garbage guy?
Yeah, with this dirt
And
bag.
retroactively, is still, it makes me think about the whole smell thing last chapter where Grover somehow just didn't smell Percy, but they're making such a big emphasis of it in this chapter
Hmm.
that again it just leaves, I don't want to say a bad taste in my mouth with the last chapter, but it
It
does
leaves
feel
something
a
to be
little
desired.
something to be desired. It feels a little sloppy, and I'm going to call it a one-time hiccup and misstep because so far everything else has been fairly consistent. But just as something else where it's like, oh, this wasn't a concept that was put out in book 2 or 3. Like, no, this is something that was set as precedent very early on. Very
Oh
early
yeah, and meaningfully so. Very
on.
meaningfully so. It is one of those things. I know we have to get through the whole novel to get to it. I cannot wait for Gabe to get what he deserves because he just continues to be so belligerently cruel to Sally, who is just trying to do what's right and be a good mom, and he's just getting in the way. And the last thing that really bothered me is a couple pages later when he describes Percy as the kid. Maybe if the kid apologizes for interrupting my poker game, oh, that makes me want to go kick him in his soft spot.
Yeah, oh, he's such a tool. And I really appreciate that Rick made Gabe so irredeemable. There was no, like, it sounds bad. I promise this is a compliment. There's just no nuance with the guy. He sucks. He's just the worst. So when he does finally get his comeuppance, it is so cathartic. It's so cathartic. And
It
again,
is.
knowing how it ends has made all of this almost more visceral because it's like the anticipation. The anticipation is building even more instead of this kind of dread of like, well, oh man, Percy's got to deal with this guy. It's like, nah, you are going to become stone cold and it's going to be so great.
I totally agree. There is nothing better than just waiting for this dirtbag to get his just desserts.
Mm-hmm.
And oh, will he get them? And I do think again, that's one of the things where the show really tamed it down, and they have to then also pull back the him turning to stone at the end and make it, oh, it was an accident, oopsie. But like, no, I want him to get what he deserves, why he deserves.
And that would be honestly one of the few things that Psycho Percy does that I'm in like full agreement with.
Man.
Now,
Oh, and then they sell him. And that's how
so,
Sally gets it. Yeah, they sell him as a
which is,
one-time phenomenal art piece, and that's how Sally eventually has enough money to go back to school.
I forgot about that. That
Yep.
is on several layers just fucked.
Yeah, because they get some of his friends at the poker table, and they call it "Men Playing Poker" is the name of the
Yeah,
statue or something, and it's sold
yeah.
as lawn art.
So, okay, I'm rereading here. They are leaving. They're getting in Gabe's 78 Camaro, which
Not one
I am
little
not a car
scratch.
person. I am not a car person, but I looked up pictures of a 78 Camaro. I hate how this car looks. I'm sorry if people disagree, but this car looks like a nerd. I don't know if that makes sense. If you look this up, hopefully you see what I mean. Its little grill on the front kind of looks like a face that looks very like meek or dumb or no, doofy. This is the kind of car where I want to like steal its milk money. Again, look it up and you'll know what I mean. Connor, are you looking at this right now?
I just pulled it up, Jack. I
You
could see it.
agree? You know what I mean? Okay, so you guys at home, please just open up a new tab, look it up on your phone, 78 Camaro. I'm sure some of you are going to disagree and say, that's actually one of the best cars, and it's got, it's blah, 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 blah. I don't care. It looks dumb, it looks bad, and I feel like that fits Gabe to a T. A car that is fancy and everything with name, but in actuality looks fucking dumb.
I don't 100% dislike it as much as you do. I do agree it looks dumb. It looks like it's trying too hard.
Exactly. There we go. I'll
Hmm.
take that. I'll take that as a win.
It like especially as like something that's trying to be a sports car. It's
Yes.
trying too hard and it's not actually looking like a sports car. It looks
Hmm.
like a blown up Hot Wheels.
Yes. There we go. I agree. So they're taking this blown up Hot Wheels. They get to their rental cabin. Okay. So they do not own it then. It
Yep,
is, in
it is a
fact,
rental.
their rental cabin on the South Shore, way out at the tip of Long Island. Percy says that he loves this place. He has, in fact, been going there since he was a baby. His mother had been going there, as we've talked about, for even longer, trying to likely reconnect with Poseidon, or at the very least, going there to feel closer to Poseidon. I want you to kind of take the lead on this one, Connor, because as I was reading this, I knew that you would have thoughts on how it was described. So please take it away.
I love the description of this cabin. For one thing first, there is a magic to old places. Places where you step in them for the first time and they still wash over that nostalgia that just makes you feel like it's a home. It's a place that's been there. It's comforting. The pastel box that it's described as, pastels are often associated with nurseries and calm, Easter, springtime, rebirth, right? That sort of thing. But then there's the other details that aren't as calming, but they still really add to the vibrancy of the place. The sand in the sheets. You can feel that. You ever been to a beach house, you go to bed and you still feel the sand between your toes? That's not a bad
Hmm.
feeling, right? You go home and there's still sand between your toes and you're like, how do I get this out? It's awful. But when you're there, it's that reminder that you're there. It kind of grounds you. And I imagine, especially for a child of Poseidon and a lover of Poseidon, that that does feel especially so grounding. I know you wouldn't love the spiders in the cabinets, but again, there's just something palpable of it. The sea being too cold to swim in, I do think is another subtle
Think that's a little
little
metaphor. I think that's maybe like a
thematic,
little metaphor or
yeah,
something.
little thematic nod, a little metaphor that
Yeah.
you can't ever, she can't ever recapture what she had with Poseidon. It is too cold to get back in. You can't get back in the sea.
Hmm.
But I think it's really good. I love the way that they described it as they get closer. Her eyes turn the color of the sea, which, knowing that Poseidon, the god of the sea, falls in love with her, I take this as 100% truth. This isn't a metaphor. This isn't a simile. Her eyes are beautiful as the sea. No, I imagine that like if you look into Sally Jackson's eyes, they're probably the color of the sea. And I would imagine that is a draw for Poseidon. This place reminds me in its description of my grandparents' cabin on Lake Michigan
Yeah.
in a visceral way. It like from
I
the sand in the sheets and the spiders in the cabinet, it
hmm
it's that. And I love that
Connor,
about this description.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. This entire description, even though it's talking about the ocean, I did not have a specific lake house that I went to as a child, but we are Michiganders. If
Oh
you're
yeah.
gonna go on a weekend getaway or a vacation, you head up north, right? Or you go to one of the lakes. And all of these descriptors were just making me Ratatouille style flashback to so many countless visits to rental cabins or Airbnbs or what have you with my family and my mom.
Oh
And
yeah.
all of those good, just pure, innocent childhood memories. And it's one of those things where, again, reading this as a kid, I probably didn't clock it all that much. But reading this now, where I have whether you want to call it benefit or curse of nostalgia, this hit really, really hard. It just felt, the term that comes to mind is just visceral. Just felt
Yes.
like such a visceral description.
This is 3 sentences. This is a 3 sentence description, and I actually think it is so amazing in that you're so right. It just captures something where you don't have to have ever been to this cabin by the ocean. You can feel it in somewhere that you've been. I mean, this reminds me of a tent in the Silver Lake Dunes going camping with
Hmm.
my mama, my grandma, and my brother. We weren't in a cabin, we were in a red tent. That's not pastel colors, but the atmosphere, it's palpable. It's palpable. You can feel it's so beautiful. And it makes you also realize how Sally could have fallen in love with a place like this.
Yeah.
How something so nostalgic can already evoke so many other aspects of nostalgia that I'm sure it captivates her. It's no wonder she goes back there over and over. It's truly, if it is as described, it's truly beautiful.
Hmm. Yeah, or even, and for those who might have read this who were maybe in a place that was very landlocked, where you didn't really have lakes, you weren't going out and chilling by the lake or anything like that, right? We have kind of the benefit of coming from, again, Michigan, a place that is, you go to the lake, that's what you do.
The Great Lakes state.
Right, exactly. When it got dark, we made a fire. We roasted hot dogs and marshmallows. Mom told me stories about when she was a kid. She told me about the book she wanted to write someday, what she wanted to do when she had enough money to stop working at the candy shop. And even that, those 4 lines, I feel like that is something that anybody can relate to. Having a
Oh yeah,
bonfire, roasting hot
absolutely.
dogs and marshmallows, but most importantly, for those that at the very least had the benefit or were lucky enough to have a good relationship with a mom or a dad or any parental figure, having those moments where they are not just your parent, but they are human, they are a person. Yes, you get
Vulnerable.
to learn more about who they were before you were even a thing or a semblance of a thing or a dream or a desire or a thought or an accident or whatever. You get to learn so much intimate detail about this parent person you look up to in these quiet moments at night by a fire. Even more than what we had already discussed with the house and the sand between the toes and the smell of the water and all that stuff, that stuck out to me the most and just made me think about,
Yeah.
with my mom, it would be going, and every year we would go and visit her family graves. And they're all of her close family, her grandparents, her aunts and uncles, and we would go and we'd visit, and then we would go and sit in the bay and we would watch all the boats go by and just be by the water. And she was always open. I could ask her about these things anytime, but my brain was so primed to ask her about her childhood, what it was like growing up. What did she hope to be? Did she reach her aspirations? How did her aspirations change? What was her family like? And those are some of my most precious memories growing up, was getting to, it sounds so weird, but meet my mom. If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Because you don't get that
No.
opportunity all the time. No, so often your parental figures are having to parent, and that is a
Hmm.
full-time job, and so you don't get those slow moments.
It's
Palpable.
very evocative of, again, things that growing up I just probably took for granted or like didn't realize that they would be profound,
Yeah.
cherished memories. And like, why would you? You're a kid.
I think that's part of what makes them so
Yeah.
nostalgic is you don't have that context when you're a kid for how important those are. And then you look back on them and you go, what I wouldn't kill to
Yeah.
have that
Have it
moment
again.
again.
Yep.
All the questions I have now that I could get
Hmm.
answers to. And you just, as a kid, you don't know, right? You don't care as much, or you just don't
Yeah.
know what you don't know. So it's not even that you don't care; you just can't ask the
Literally, it's
question.
not even a thought. Yeah. It's not a lack of caring or ambivalence. It is an incapacity. Like, you are incapable of doing it.
And not to divert from where you were, but to add to it, I think part of what they're really establishing here is Percy has this faint, bare of
Yeah.
a memory of what he thinks his father is like. And I think that's really what we're contrasting here is this tangible thing that he has with his mom. And honestly, he really cherishes it. Like he's clearly curious about his dad, but At most, there's, if you consider there's like 3 pages of just this cabin and what it means and talking with his mom, and a single page, half a page of that is him asking about his dad. It shows how much more important the rest of the context around that is, right? It's giving him that space where he feels comfortable asking that. It's honestly, it really is beautiful. You don't have to see it to be able to picture the way the campfire just sits there, hear the crackle, smell the smoke, and just feel that safety of that place. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
And then it just keeps piling on. So they talk about Percy's dad, who he was in vague details, and
Very.
Percy's feeling all of this internal conflict, and he has all these questions, and he's frustrated and worried, and he's thinking about how they're stuck with Smelly Gabe when apparently his dad was tall, handsome, powerful, rich. And it then goes to how Percy feels that Sally is sending him away again. That there's all of these very close, again, intimate moments, and then this, what Percy perceives as his reality of, this is so great, why does my mom not want me here? And
Yeah.
she says, it's not that I don't want you around, I have to send you away for your own good. And this, although very different situations, we're on the roll with all this nostalgia talk. The feeling of, and I don't know if you remember the moment where your parents, or maybe even more specifically your mom, were sending you off to college for the first time.
I thought that's where you're going,
Mm-hmm.
Jack. I remember this moment. There are so few things that are burned into my brain. The image of my mom just standing outside of the car, knowing that she had to get back
Yeah.
in and leave after all my stuff had been unpacked into my dorm room, burned it. I don't see my mom
Mm-hmm.
cry a lot. That image is burned into
Mm-hmm.
my brain, and it will never leave. And I totally understand what you're saying. Like, that is so captured here, but also I just think it's so important to like point out the fact that even Percy clocks, you're supposed to compare these two things, that her words remind him of what Mr.
Yes.
Brunner Chiron said back
Mm-hmm.
at Yancey. But she says the more motherly thing that he needs to hear when he's like, because I'm not normal. And she's like, you say that as if that's
Right.
a bad thing. Even now, when Percy is hurting and feeling distraught and saying something mean back to her in this vulnerable moment, she's being a really
Mm-hmm.
good mom. I even mentioned take notes, Chiron, because that's what it's
Yes.
about. She's there to support and go, hey, even the things that you may not like about yourself that make you different, she sees them
Mm-hmm.
as a good thing. And she just wants to keep him safe. And it's so special. And yeah, it totally does capture that same sort of vibe of that, like, I'm leaving you alone for the first time. Please
Yes.
be safe.
Yeah.
That's all I ask for. I want one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Please be
And now the
safe.
key difference, at least with me, is that when I was going to college, I was super hyped. I was like, all right, see ya. I'm ready to go.
Same.
Now, do I remember having that, moment with my mom where it was a huge deal for her, and then that bled into me? Absolutely. But that obviously very different here from Percy. He doesn't want to leave. He doesn't want to have to be left alone.
Yeah, he's
Yeah, he's a
12.
kid.
Well, he's a kid, and he's a kid who's spent a lot of time being
Yeah.
pushed away, or at least perceiving being
Hmm.
pushed away.
So we continue on more, and Percy is debating on whether he wants to tell his mom everything, right? Spill the beans. And at this point, Sally clearly knows enough without all the gory
Oh,
details.
she knows something.
She knows something that's going on, probably more than Percy does. Percy thinks that he has his cards close to his chest. No, 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 no. He's not even working with a full deck. And so they start bringing up this summer camp, and which is Camp Half Blood. And there's again this very bittersweet kind of tender moment of Sally saying, like, this is the best that we can do for you. I have to send you there. I don't want you, like, I do not want you to have to go there, but you need to. It might be saying goodbye for good. And then the night ends on this very sour, sad, and dour note. And Percy has, at the very least, as far as I remember for this book, his first proper demigod dream.
I think that this is the first definite proper demigod dream for sure. Like, for sure, for sure. And I think there are small moments before this where, like, he has nightmares about Mrs.
Mm-hmm.
Dodds. You could argue that's a demigod dream. I made a note that the fact that he remembered anything about his father might be another reference to a
Mhm.
demigod dream, but this is definitely the first obvious, super palpable, this is plot relevant and relevant to what is about to happen to you, prophetic
Mhm.
demigod dream, for sure.
Lots of symbolism. The white horse, the golden eagle. I wonder who those guys are. Fighting at the edge of the surf. Wonder what that means.
I mean, I love it. It outlines
Oh
the
yeah,
whole plot
yeah. And
right then and
Percy's
there.
gotta.
Poseidon
That's
is the
right.
white horse, Zeus the golden eagle, and
Percy's
Percy's
gotta
got to
stop
stop
him.
him. And I love the goading voice of
Yes.
Kronos in the
Which
background. It
twist?
is, it's
You
perfect.
say that with the benefit of hindsight, Connor. But we hear a monstrous voice chuckled somewhere beneath the earth. We don't know about Kronos yet. At this point, we're thinking, oh shoot, it's probably Hades.
That is a great Hades
Yeah.
red herring. I don't know how I missed that. Well, I know how I missed that. It's because I've read this book enough times that I'm like, oh, that's Kronos. But you make a great point. Like as a novel, if you're reading this for the first time, you're like, that's all
Yes.
three of them. That's your Zeus, that's your Poseidon, and that's your Hades. It's really
Mhm.
well done.
Percy then wakes up.
Zeus is
He's
throwing more
pissed.
tantrums.
No horse, no
Um,
eagle, just an actual lightning storm. And not just a
yeah,
lightning storm, it's a
which
straight up
yikes.
hurricane in what is this, like May?
This would be whenever school ends, so I'm guessing closer to
June?
June.
I know because the summer solstice, that's the big date. So that's June 21st.
Yeah, that's the big deadline. That gives Percy 3 weeks if this is early June. Maybe this is late May. I'll
Late
give you
May,
late
early June.
May.
So it's not hurricane season. That's the big point.
It's not hurricane season, exactly.
And at that point, that's when there's a noise and a desperate voice and somebody pounding on the cabin door. And it's Grover, but it's not Grover because Grover, he's not wearing any pants. It
It
all
all comes
finally,
full
at this
circle.
point, I'd forgotten the title of this chapter, but it all goes back to Grover hanging dong. He's doing a full Winnie the Pooh. He's got a shirt on, no pants. He's Donald Duck in it.
Oh yeah. And this is where I said, and now on to the
Yes,
good stuff.
this.
Because this is where things really pick up and get
Yes.
interesting
Yep.
heading
All of
forward.
the mandatory plot setting stuff is, I think, behind us. There's still obviously going to be more foundation set once we learn more about Camp Half Blood. But this is where the fun begins. This is where it starts getting kooky crazy and it starts going at like a clip. We're moving fast.
Now, how would you like a little myth roundup for this chapter? Because there isn't much at all, but there's one that you just kind of glossed over, and it's actually
Let's
really
hear it.
fun.
Hold on. I'm going to pause you right there, Past Connor. A quick note before we get properly started here. You may notice that Jack and I sound a little different. We've recorded this later because chapter 3 was still very early on and the myth section was a little bit short. We had later decided that we wanted to create a just the myths section, which meant that we wanted the myths to be a little bit more robust. So we're going back and we're recovering the birth of Heracles and Heracles strangling some snakes in a parallel to Percy. So, why don't we cozy up in this little seaside cabin and talk some myth?
Let's do it.
All right. So today we are talking about the parallels between Percy strangling a snake and Heracles strangling a snake. And I thought, since we won't really have a better time to talk about this, why don't we talk about the full myth surrounding the birth of Heracles? And why Hera was so pissed off in the first place as to send a snake to kill a baby. Because I feel like we should figure out why that happens.
Definitely deserved. Probably deserved. I don't know.
You think
Fuck
so?
that baby. Yeah.
There
Maybe he
is
just
an
had bad
argument.
vibes.
There is an argument to be made that it is deserved, but we'll get there. I want to preface this with the sheer amount of information on Heracles does make it a little hard to parse through at times, but I think I've gotten it down to the core aspects. That means that before we can introduce the birth of Heracles, we should probably take a few moments to start with his parents. The most important of which is actually probably a woman named Alcmene. That's Heracles' mother. Her parentage changes based on which version, but she is, for all intents and purposes, a descendant of Perseus. So she's roughly 1/8 divine blood. It's actually 1/8 plus, because she is both Zeus's great granddaughter and Zeus's great great granddaughter. Her father is Electryon, who is a son of Perseus, And her mother is Anaxo, who is Electrion's niece. Now, that does come from Pseudo-Apollodorus, so take it as you will. But much earlier, Hesiod wrote around 750 to 850 BC in a poem about the shield of Heracles that Heracles' mother was the tallest, most beautiful woman with wisdom surpassed by no person born of mortal parents. He wrote specifically that her face and dark eyes were as charming as Aphrodite's, which is comparing a woman to Aphrodite, which is a huge no-no. So this woman must have been truly beautiful. He also, in this poem, makes a specific note that she honored her husband like no woman before her. This means that since the very earliest versions of this myth that we have written down, Alcmene is a faithful wife and partner. Now let's talk about Amphitryon, who is Heracles' stepdad. So we have two versions of this. If we go based on the same poem from Hesiod, he actually killed his would-be father-in-law in a fit of rage over a disagreement regarding some cattle. He throws his club, clocks his father, would-be father-in-law in the head, and kills him. This is lightly relevant because Heracles' primary character flaw across his mythology is his wrath, something that I've noted is similar to Percy, and is just generally important. So in this earlier version, Heracles' own wrath is foreshadowed by the actions of his father. Now, the later version from Pseudo-Apollodorus says that Amphitryon killed his would-be father-in-law by accident because he was angry at one of the cows when he threw his club and just missed. Either way, Amphitryon killed Electryon and is therefore exiled by his would-be brother-in-law. That then brings us to the actual dad, Zeus, enter in the picture. So I've set the scene for you. We have Alcmene, who is a beautiful woman who is notably ever faithful to her soon-to-be husband, and Amphitryon, who has to atone for killing Electryon, and therefore is going away on his atonement quest. We won't talk about the atonement quest, because while Amphitryon is out, Zeus is taken by Alcmene's beauty. Apparently, as ever, taunted by the idea that there is literally a single woman that he cannot have. So, Zeus decides to deceive Alcmene by showing up to her home in the form of her husband who has been out working on atoning for his sins, and she is so thrilled that her husband is back that they have sex and Heracles is conceived. The next day, Amphitryon actually gets home, and he's like, I did it. I've atoned for my wrongdoing. We can finally get married. And Alcmenes is like, again? If you say so. And they have sex, and they conceive a second child, Heracles' brother Iphicles. So we've set the stage. The day after.
I see. So Heracles was just marinating and was like, I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait to fertilize.
Yep, and the two
And he's
will
like,
be
all
born
right.
as twins.
Great. Understood.
Yep. So Zeus has already done a big no-no in the eyes of Hera because he's cheated on her, which she hates.
Yeah,
And
it's a
then,
day that ends in Y. Get used to it, Hera. That's what he does.
unfortunately. And also, he has specifically interrupted Alcmene's faithfulness to her soon-to-be husband, which Hera apparently does not care about, despite her usual care for fidelity. And so Hera is mad, which, fair, Zeus is always terrible. He has literally deceived a woman to have sex with her, which, whether she knew it or not, is absolutely assault. But again, it's Zeus. Yeah. He does this. He's terrible. And so we trace back the sources way, way back. This is mentioned even in the Iliad, which is around the same time as Hesiod's writing of the poem that we were referencing earlier. And Alcmene and Amphitryon have gotten married, and the boys are about to be born. And Zeus, proud of the fact that he is about to have a son, announces to all the other gods that on that day a child by Zeus himself would be born and rule all those around him. Hera then is like, you're sure of that? And he's like, of course I'm sure of that. And she says, would you swear an oath stating that that would be true? And he's like, yeah, sure, why not? So Hera descends from Olympus to Argos and causes the wife of Sthenelus, who is a son of Perseus and also Alcmene's brother-in-law who banished Amphitryon, to give birth to their son only after 7 months, meaning that Zeus's oath is fulfilled. Unfortunately, the fulfillment of the oath, though, is that Eurystheus was born and not Heracles. The oath is fulfilled, and Hera is like, all right, I win now. You, goddess of childbirth, you're taking the day off. Paid leave. Get out of here. Go sit in a chair with your legs crossed. Nobody's having babies today. And so
Okay, girl boss.
that is the story. In another version, Hera actually sends a bunch of witches to stop the birth. Either way, it doesn't work, because in this version, because it's more fun, the goddess of childbirth, Ilithia, she's not allowed to do any more work today, so she's sitting there with her legs crossed and her clothes tied, and no more babies are to be born, in the hopes that Alcmene will die from the pain of childbirth before ever giving birth to the babies. This leads one of Alcmene's servants, a woman named Galanthus, to
Wait,
lie.
hold on, pause. So that means that labor can still happen. You just
Yep.
can't have the baby.
Correct.
That is awful. That's
Cruel.
horrible.
Yeah, no, Hera specifically intended for Alcmene to die from the pain of labor.
I see.
It is cruel. And mind you, this woman, at this point, doesn't even know that she is pregnant with a child
I
of
was gonna
Zeus.
say, she didn't know she did anything wrong.
Correct. And so this leads one of Alcmene's servants, a woman named Galanthus, to go to Ilithia and lie to her, saying, the baby has been born, which causes Ilithia to jump from her chair, which inadvertently somehow allows Alcmene to finally give birth, because I guess Ilithia's legs are no longer crossed, and that's what controls the flow of actually babies.
Just like, that's real life. That's how it works, Connor.
I should have known.
Mm-hmm.
Keep your legs crossed, kids. Don't be a
That's right.
teen
And
parent.
then you won't have babies.
And for Galanthus's good deed, for helping Alcmene to finally give birth and be relieved of her pain, Hera, reasonably of course, turns Galanthus into a weasel, because how dare you defy Hera?
Uh-huh.
Yep.
That's a rational point A to B. I understand.
So the 2 children are born, and Alcmene gives birth to 2 boys, Alcides and Iphicles. Not Heracles and Iphicles, Alcides and Iphicles. The next part of the story comes from Diodorus of Sicily from around the 1st century BC, and he recounts that fearing further acts of revenge from the queen of the gods herself, Alcmene, unfortunately but rather reasonably, decides that frankly, Alcides is more trouble than he's worth, so she follows the age-old tradition of, I can't kill my family because that would anger the gods, so I'll just leave this baby here in the middle of nowhere and hope that nothing bad happens. Athena, however, has other plans. As the protector of heroes, she scoops up little Alcides and says, hey Hera, look at this poor abandoned little baby boy. Who would abandon such a healthy and strong baby? And Hera goes, yeah, that is a cute kid. Who would abandon them? Give him here. I'll nurse the child. And so Hera begins to feed Alcides. Alcides, being a child of Zeus, is very strong. And being given the opportunity to breastfeed from the queen of the gods, apparently suckles so hard that Hera pushes him away, causing her milk to spray across the heavens, creating the Milky Way. Yeah, I bet you didn't think we were getting an origin for the beauty of the cosmos.
Lying to me, Connor. You're telling me that the infinite and divine beauty of the stars above is just titty milk?
That is specifically what
I
the
love
Greeks
space
thought.
even more now.
Oh no! I'm sure I can hear all of you at home asking, but where are the snakes? Fear not, we're almost there. So Hera is fed up with this baby and decides that she no longer has sympathy for it. So she says, hey, Athena, take this thing back to where it came from. And Athena's like, all right, sure. So she takes Alcides back to Alcmene and Amphitryon, and they're like, he's back? Well, that's surprising. We thought he would die. And so they're like, all right, well, if Hera's going to be super pissed at us, I know what we should do. Let's rename the child to Heracles, meaning Hera's pride or Hera's glory, as an attempt to appease the goddess. Unfortunately, what it actually does is say, hey, Hera, this baby that you did not like, he's also the baby that just caused you pain. So now, the two babies that the goddess has not liked in the last short while are both the same kid. So she decides those mortals need punished, and those kids have gotta go. Poor Iphicles is just getting caught in the crossfire. So she sends snakes to the boy's room, and while Iphicles cries in fear, Heracles grabs each one in his hands and strangles them to death until the nurse comes in to see the commotion and only sees Heracles playing with the corpses of two snakes like toys. And after all of this, Amphitryon, he's like, all right, something is up. I don't know what the fuck is going on. And so he does something that, Jack, I know you will appreciate per some of our later chapters. He says, you know what? This shit is beyond me. Somebody go get an oracle because I need divine guidance.
Good. Way to be proactive, man. Way to seek answers.
And so he sends for the seer, Tiresias, who's notably the snake guy that we talk about when we talk about Caduceus later. And Tiresias gives a prophecy that the boy will have an unusual future and that he will vanquish numerous monsters. And that is the birth of Heracles with some snakes.
Wow. Yeah, and the snakes just happen to be there. Yeah.
Yep. Now, this is all technically because someone sent a snake to try and kill Percy. I'm noticing a pattern of one snake per child. When it comes to demigods, you guys might just have to up the number. Clearly, one snake per child is not enough snakes.
It's not cutting it.
So Percy also strangles a snake to death. What that makes me question, though, is which goddess did Poseidon piss off? Or, crazy theory, is this a leftover vestigial part of Percy Jackson from a perhaps earlier draft where Perseus was still a son of Zeus? My speculation hat is on.
Helmet on. No, that's the helmet.
Oh, my helmet's on? Either way.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think?
That's compelling. That's interesting as a concept, that's for sure. Sally is shown she's pretty good when it comes to understanding myths and mythology. If she found Percy having strangled a snake to death in his crib, do you think she'd be like, all right, you're going on formula? I know what he did to that to Hera, and we've already got a Milky Way.
Oh my god, she doesn't want to create another galaxy.
Yeah, she's like, listen, man, I need to keep these things intact.
Honestly, the responsible thing to do. I hope she did. I hope from the moment that she was like, all right, I get it. You've informed me you're a god and this child is going to be a literal demigod. No thanks. I would like to keep my chest intact.
Not getting anywhere near me. I need to keep these for when your dad comes back. That'll
Here's
happen,
a bottle.
right?
I put some seawater in it. You'll be fine.
Oh, that's awful.
He's a child of
salt
Poseidon.
water?
He'll be fine.
But that is the end of the chapter, and I'm very excited. I mean, we get to see the Minotaur next chapter.
Spoilers, Connor.
But this was a really fun one. I mean, there's not a lot of myth. There's not a lot of depth of story in like what needs to happen going forward. This is just a really well-written chapter to evoke feelings and set ground, and it's really well done.
Yeah, and I think when we look next week at chapter 4, if chapter 4 keeps up this momentum of not even just narrative, but also just Rick really getting into a flow with his prose, I think that I can safely say chapter 3 is where the book really started to hit its stride, which is, again, insanely early on for a book to hit its stride. That's the equivalent of like a TV show hitting its stride like episode 2.
Yeah, no, 100%. And unfortunately, it's one of the things that I actually don't feel like, especially in retrospect, having just recently watched the show, that the show captures
Mm-hmm.
nearly as well. The show has to kind of rush you to Camp
Mm-hmm.
Half-Blood, because that's where the action really starts. That's where they get you hooked. But in the novel, they can really take some more time with it and spend time with those characters, and you don't have to do the flashbacks to set up Sally and all of that sort of thing. You just get it and you feel it, and you will continue to feel it throughout the novel as Sally ends up becoming the driving force for Percy throughout most of his journey. I mean, he, to a certain extent, really couldn't care less about the lightning bolt outside of not wanting to die, which like is a big thing, but really his motivation is getting his mother back. And this chapter, it sells
Mm-hmm.
you on that. It says, this is going to be the carrot on a string that we are going to dangle in front of you for the rest of the book, and you're going to buy it. You are going to chase
Oh
it.
yeah, I'd risk my life for Sally at this point. She's the best.
100%.
I am now more excited than ever to continue reading the book. First two chapters were fun going back into. This third one, it is difficult going only at like a week at a time. I want to binge this book.
This one gets me
Yes.
excited. I agree. This one gets me really excited. Well, I think the fastest way to get ourselves to the next book then is to end it here.
See ya.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to support our content, please be sure to leave a review, share with your friends, and follow us on all your favorite podcast platforms. Until next time, this has been Notes from the Oracle.